Former Vice President Pence, thanks for taking the time to have a conversation.
You bet, Robert.
Here in Iowa.
Welcome back to Iowa.
It's always good to be back in Iowa. The Supreme Court has said that abortion medication will be available for now as the litigation continues. A recent CBS News poll said that 2/3 of Americans believe that abortion medication should be available in states where abortion is legal. Are they wrong?
Well, Robert, you and I have known each other a long time. I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. I think the fact the Biden administration allowed mifepristone to be made available on a mail-order basis was a fundamental change, even in states that have limited abortion. And I'd like to see this medication off the market to protect the unborn, but also I have deep concerns about the way the FDA went about approving mifepristone 20 years ago. They bypassed the ordinary procedure, and in the first 6 years alone, there were over 1,000 women that had serious health outcomes. There were 6 fatalities. We think of a young woman named Holly Patterson who lost her life in 2003. Her parents didn't even know she was pregnant, and she took this medication. And I'm grateful that action is being taken in the courts to hold the FDA accountable to what the law requires in reviewing any medication that's made on the marketplace. So for the sake of protecting the unborn, but also for the health and safety of women, I'm looking forward to this litigation continuing and holding the manufacturers of mifepristone accountable and ultimately putting the interests of women first.
The FDA has disputed claims that it's unsafe, saying that serious complications are rare and less than 1% of patients need hospitalization. That's their position.
Well, I understand that, Robert, but under the Obama administration, the FDA actually stopped chronicling non-fatal results of mifepristone. And one of the things that I hope changes in the course of this litigation is the FDA gets back to reporting to the American people all of the health impacts. In those first 6 years, 1,000 women had serious health challenges as a result of taking that medication. But since 2016, that information has not been available to the public. So again, I want to say, as you know, I'm pro-life. I'd like to see us restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law in every state in the nation, and be a nation that embraces life. But I do believe this issue bears upon the health and safety of women, and we've got to hold the FDA accountable to the law.
Very big right now in the Republican Party. There's a real debate. You're close to the Susan B. Anthony list. Its leader, anti-abortion activist Marjorie Dannenfelser, has said that anyone who takes former President Trump's position that states should decide what happens on abortion, she has called that a morally indefensible position. Do you agree?
Well, my view is that the cause of restoring the sanctity of life to the center of American law is the calling of our time. The Supreme Court in the Dobbs decision last June gave the American people a new beginning for life. It returned the question of abortion to the states and to the American people, but it didn't just return it exclusively to the states. And that's where I disagree with the former president. This isn't a states-only decision. We have elected representatives in the Congress of the United States, and we'll elect a president again in 2024. And I think the American people would welcome a minimum national standard in Washington, D.C., 15 weeks, that's supported by more than 65% of the American public. But the reality is this will likely be sorted out on a state-by-state basis in the legislative process. But I believe those of us that want to see the cause of the sanctity of life advanced, and the millions of Americans who support the cause of life want to see leaders at every level, local, state, and federal, that are standing for life in every way.
Is former President Trump in retreat on the abortion front?
Well, I'd leave that to others.
What's your take?
You can ask him.
Your top aide, Mark Short, has said on the record, former President Trump is in retreat.
Well, look, that's a great question for him. I couldn't be more proud to have been vice president in the administration that appointed 3 of the justices to the Supreme Court, that sent Roe versus Wade to the ash heap of history. And so I'll always be grateful for the president's decision in appointing those justices to the court and for the pro-life stance that we took throughout our administration. But Robert, now we're in a new season, and I think millions of pro-life Americans want to see us seize every opportunity to put the interests of the unborn first, and also to, in equal measure, to demonstrate the generosity and compassion of the American people toward women who've been caught up in abortion in the last 50 years and women who find themselves in a crisis pregnancy today. That to me is the key going forward, is if we stand on principle, we stand for the sanctity of human life, which I believe the unalienable right to life, it's enshrined in our founding documents. But beyond that, we've just got to show the generosity and compassion of the American people in new and renewed ways. States that are passing new restrictions on abortion are doing that, and I welcome that, and I think it's a pathway toward winning hearts and minds in the future.
You just spoke at the National Rifle Association in your home state of Indiana. There has been a spate of gun violence in recent weeks, and it's at times legal gun owners shooting people who come up to their door, on a driveway, in a parking lot. What is happening in America, and can anything be done to dial down the fear and the violence?
Well, our hearts go out to the families of lost loved ones in the incidents in Kansas City and in upstate New York. I just can't imagine the pain that they're enduring in that tragedy. But tragedy should not require us to forfeit our liberty. And the right of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms is enshrined in the Constitution of the United States. I don't know the facts of those cases. I'm confident that local law enforcement will move forward and apply the law in a proper way. But I can't help but suspect that this recent spate of tragedies is evidence of the fear that so many Americans are feeling about the crime wave besetting this country. I mean, look, we literally have lost control of the southern border. We not only have 5 million people that have come across the border, which is about to get worse as the Biden administration repeals Title 42 next week, but everywhere I go, I hear about the avalanche of fentanyl in all of our cities that is tearing apart families, tearing apart lives, and driving a crime wave. Add to that liberal prosecutors that aren't putting people behind bars. Add to that the defund the police movement. I hear it everywhere I go. There are millions of Americans who are deeply concerned about their safety, about their family's safety. And while I don't know if it was implicated in these tragic incidents, I think we've got to get serious about supporting law enforcement, about bringing law and order back to the streets of our cities and towns.
But I think most people would agree, even if you have fear about crime in your community, there's no excuse to be just shooting at somebody at your door or in a parking lot.
No, I can't. I just can't. I can't imagine the circumstances that I read about in the press in either of those cases, and I'm sure local law enforcement will hold people to a proper accounting. But at the end of the day, I just wonder. I wonder if it isn't some reflection of the fear the American people feel about the crime wave that's impacting our country, literally from coast to coast.
You have agreed to appear before the special counsel's ongoing grand jury investigating January 6th with some constraints on your testimony. Mm-hmm. Have you set a date with the special counsel about your appearance?
Well, our attorneys have worked that out with the Justice Department, but I will say I'm grateful that the court recognized that there are specific constitutional protections unique to the Vice President when you're serving in your role as President of the Senate. I thought it was important to make that challenge. For the first time in history, a federal court acknowledged that provision of the Constitution applies to the Vice President, and they've limited what they'll be requesting of me. But beyond that, I can tell you, Robert, we'll obey the law. We'll tell the truth, and the story that I've been telling the American people all across the country, the story that I wrote in the pages of my memoir, that'll be what I tell in that setting as well.
But for a layperson who's not a lawyer, what are the constraints in your view on your upcoming testimony? Will you, for example, be able to testify in your view about the private conversations you have had with President Trump? Is that within the range of what you could do before the grand jury?
I think I'm limited about what I can say about the proceedings of the grand jury or the decision of the judge, but people can be confident that we'll obey the law, we'll comply with the law. But I got to tell you, Robert, nobody's talking to me about this anywhere I go in the country. I mean, the truth is here in Iowa, when I was just visiting with some of the Republican women gathered here, we talked about a lot of different things, concerns they have about the country at home and abroad, how this administration has weakened our country in virtually every way. But I just don't hear about this, other than I think the American people are concerned about what they perceive to be a two-tiered system of justice, that equal treatment under the law is something that we owe to every American. And when you see not only this investigation going forward, but what's happening in New York, what's happening in Georgia,
What about
and
the
then the
investigation?
revelations this week about by a whistleblower that it appears that the FBI has been slow walking an investigation into Hunter Biden, the appalling efforts by big tech and many in the major media during the 2020 campaign to suppress the Hunter Biden story, and now what appears to be a coordination between the Biden campaign and the so-called former intelligence officials
We
to
haven't seen
dismiss that evidence.
The full testimony from Mike Morrell yet.
People want equal treatment under the
Understood.
law, and I hold to that.
What about
strongly.
any update on the classified records found in your home? The FBI and DOJ have said they'd offer an assessment or review. Is there any update you can share on that?
Our lawyers continue to work with them. We've been transparent, not only with Justice Department, but with members of Congress, and fully cooperated. I'm hoping we wrap up that inquiry quickly.
Fox News just settled with Dominion for $787 million over false claims that were on the network. Any reaction?
Well, I would assume that Fox News determined what the appropriate settlement was and what the exposure was in that case. I can't really speak to it. That was not a time in my life that I was watching a lot of television, Robert. I was focused on the task at hand, focused on doing our duty under the Constitution of the United States. I'll always believe, by God's grace, that we did that, but I'll leave it to that corporation to have made the settlement they made. But I will tell you that I believe this principle of a free and independent press is an important one, and at least in this settlement, I think we no longer have the possibility of revisiting what the standard we apply to the media is. The free flow of information, the role that your network, and other members of the media play is vital to our democracy, and I'll always stand for a free and independent press, even when I don't agree with what you say or do.
It's almost May. When are you going to decide on whether you are running for the Republican nomination?
Well, we're getting awful close, and we're getting a lot of encouragement around the country. You know, everywhere I go, people are deeply concerned about the way the Biden administration has weakened America at home and abroad. And I have people coming up to me, as I did today here in Iowa, and thank me for my service as Vice President, for my career in the Congress and as a governor, and continue to encourage us to offer our services to the American people. But I don't have anything to announce today, Robert, but
Will you make a hard decision by late June? There's a new report out.
Oh, I think anyone that would be serious about seeking the Republican nomination would need to be in this contest by June. And,
so you will make a decision by late June?
I think if we have an announcement to make,
Whether
it'll be well before late June.
Well before. At this point, everyone here is wondering, as I'm talking to voters here in Iowa, they say, okay, former Vice President Pence hasn't decided yet, but are you leaning in or are you leaning away from running?
Well, I'm here in Iowa, Robert.
Well, that's a tell.
Look, I love this country. And I think America's in a lot of trouble. And for my wife and I, as we have spent time in prayer and counseling friends, we think about the extraordinary privileges that we've had to serve this country. I was a leader in the Congress. I led Indiana as governor. I served in 4 consequential years as Vice President of the United States. And what I hear people telling me is that the challenges that we're facing in an increasingly dangerous world, the challenges that we're facing in this economy with inflation at a 40-year high, a crisis at our border, are going to require someone who has the ability to step in on day one and set our country back on a path towards security and prosperity. And so we're thinking very deeply about that. And as I said, I don't have anything to announce today,
like you're leaning
but
in.
Look,
leaning toward it versus away.
I would tell you that I'm very humbled by the encouragement that we're receiving, and I promise when we have something to announce, you'll be among the first to know.
Former President Trump's name barely uttered by so many other top Republicans. They don't say his name. It almost seems like they're scared to say his name. Are you scared to say Trump's name should you decide to run?
You know, the president and I had a very close working relationship for 4 years. It didn't end well, but I'm proud of what our team accomplished during those years. And you know, should we choose to enter this race, I look forward to a vigorous debate about the future of the country. And what I hear from people about us is that there may be room in this field for traditional conservative. You know, I'm somebody that believes in a strong national defense and that America's the leader of the free world, that we ought to lean into freedom's fight around the planet. And that includes supporting the courageous fighters in Ukraine. I'm someone who believes in a limited federal government, less taxes, less government, but also I think we've got to be straight with the American people about the debt crisis facing our children and grandchildren. And then when it comes to values, I stand without apology for the right to life, and that with border security, standing up to China, standing up for free and fair trade. I just have more and more people saying to me that our brand of traditional conservatism in a party that the modern party was minted maybe 50 years ago, that there may be room for that, and that'll be a big part of anything that we announce in the future.
But former President Trump went before the RNC in recent weeks and said the old Republican Party is dead. You say traditional conservatism's still alive.
Well, look, I became a Republican because of the voice and the values of Ronald Reagan, the commitment to a strong defense, to fiscal responsibility, to traditional values. And I believe that's still the core of our movement. And more importantly, I think it's still where the American people are, Robert. I mean, everywhere I go, the people are grateful for what we were able to do during the Trump-Pence years, putting those principles into practice. There's more work to be done. There are things that we didn't get to. But at the end of the day, I think the American people still stand on those timeless American ideals, and I still think it's the heart of the Republican Party.
So if you run as a traditional conservative Republican, I wonder how forceful you're willing to be in the Republican race. Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, taking on a corporation, Disney. Would you take DeSantis on for how he has handled Disney?
Well, what I would tell you is, anybody that knows my political careers knows I never hesitate to attack bad ideas. But I won't be attacking my opponents personally.
Raising questions about their positions?
Look, I think personal attacks have no place in public life. But where I disagree, if I'm in this field, I promise you we'll continue to do what we've always done. In all the years you've known me, we'll continue to speak boldly but optimistically about the issues facing the country, and we'll always ground them in that traditional conservative view of limited federal government, free market economics, a strong defense, and traditional values.
President Biden is expected to announce his re-election campaign in the coming days. Do you see him as a tough opponent?
Well, I think any Democrat candidate would be a tough opponent. Our nation is maybe more divided than any time in my lifetime, and it's a free country. The president's entitled to seek re-election, but I relish the chance for our party to run against Joe Biden. I mean, literally, his record at home and abroad has weakened our country, and the American people know it. Virtually every crisis that we're facing in this country, whether it be a border crisis, whether it be record inflation, or with flow of fentanyl into our cities. You can point to decisions made by this administration that have set those crises into motion. And on the world stage, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, the capitulation to Iran, and the capitulation to Russia on Nord Stream 2 before the Ukrainian war, it's all sent a message of weakness.
But what's the
I think
top
the American
issue?
people are looking for new leadership, for strong American leadership that's experienced, that can look the world in the eye and tell them that we're going to stand by our interests, stand by our values, and says here at home that we're going to rein in big government that's been driving this economy into a ditch.
Former Vice President Pence, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Robert. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you.